Oh, it's going. Nice. Okay, well, great. I'm Morgan Hollick. I'm the youth pastor in charge of middle school, high school, and college and young adult ministries here at Summit Church, and I'm glad that you're joining us on this Tuesday. This past weekend, our sermon was on Enneagram 8, so the Challenger.
It's going.
So let's go over the Bible verse for this week. My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. It's from 2 Corinthians 12:9. So we invite you to memorize that with us this week. Also, if you're joining us, share your name and any glory sightings that you've seen throughout the week, and any prayer requests you might have. My glory sighting is over Labor Day weekend. I drove to Colorado Springs, where my mom lives, and it was just really refreshing and filled my cup back up to just be with family, and to just do things that we used to do. It was a lot of fun. And so I would also love to hear anything you all did over Labor Day. I saw you all hiking and doing all of the things, so I would love to see it. I think today's meditation moments is actually really great. Over the weekend, if you kept up with us and you watched the sermon, you heard Andy, the youth pastor from River Church, share with us a little bit. He is an Enneagram 8. And something Andy said really stood out to me. And so I wanted to talk about it a little bit more with you. Pastor Jeff was asking him about weaknesses or vices that 8s often encounter, and that being lust. And Andy talks about it, and he says, yes, there can be lust of people, but also lust of things and lust of money. And he says, but often the mantra that we're telling ourselves, what we believe that leads to that lust ultimately is, I am not enough, so I need this. I need something else to make me complete and enough. Brene Brown has this, I don't know if you want to call it a documentary. It's really just someone recorded like an hour and a half long speech of hers, and it's on Netflix now. So I super encourage you to watch it. It's really good. But she shares this story about going on vacation. So they go to, I think it's called, I can't remember the name of the lake, but it's in Austin, Texas. And her and all her extended family go, and she talks to her husband. She's like, I want us to work out every single day. And both of them used to be competitive swimmers, and so they decide every morning they're going to swim together, swim across this big lake. And she said one day she looks at him like mid-swim and calls him over, and she's just like, I love doing this with you. This means so much to me. And he said, yep, water's good, and kept swimming. And she was like, well, that was weird. And she said her first thought, honestly, was he's just so overwhelmed by the fact that I just declared my love for him that he's just speechless. But they keep swimming. And on their way back, she thinks, should I try again? Should I try to tell him that I love him again? And so she does it. She's like, hey, Steve, like, I just want to tell you how much this means to me. I love doing this with you. And he looks at her and he says, water's good, and keeps swimming back. And she says at this point, she's just pissed off. She's like, what in the world? Like, why is he not responding to me? I'm never the one who declares my love like this. It's normally him. So they get back to the dock. And she says something like, hey, we need to talk about this. Like, I just declared my love for you and you're not even responding. And he says something along the lines of, look, Brene, I don't mind swimming around the lake all day with the kids. I don't mind it. And she says at this point, she thinks there's been like this neurological event. Like, he's not making any sense. And she's like, what is going on? He's like, look, I don't mind swimming with the kids all day. And she's like, this is so confusing to me. You're gonna have to he's like, listen, I don't want to do this with you. She says at this moment, there's obviously this like wave of panic of like, I don't want to do this with you, especially coming from a spouse. And so at this point, she shares this technique, and it's responding to someone, especially in this high stress situation, by beginning with, I'm telling myself. And so she said, when they went out to do all the swimming, she put her old Speedo on from college and was feeling really self-conscious about that. And she said, Steve, here's what I'm telling myself right now. I'm telling myself that you took one good look at me when I was like trying to profess my love to you in the water. You saw me in my swimsuit and you thought, wow, she doesn't rock that the way she used to. She just does not look good anymore. And she goes, the second story I'm telling myself is that you took one good look at me in the water and thought, this is not the woman I married. And he responded and he told her this story. He was like, no, I had this dream last night that I was swimming with all the kids that are here, and this boat came and I was trying to wave it off, but it just kept coming. So I took all the kids underwater and was holding them. And I could tell that our son, if I kept him under much longer, he was going to drown. So he was feeling all of this stress from this dream that he just had to protect and keep everybody safe. And so he said while he was swimming, he was just counting strokes to fend off a panic attack, and he didn't even hear what she said. And she was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like, we're just so not on the same page about what we're thinking and what's going on. But she said they entered this perfect shame dance of her playing into this culture always says, women aren't good enough, aren't beautiful enough. There's this body image problem amongst women, especially in North America. And for men, what are men always taught? Don't be weak. And so they're both just like living into this shame, this mantra of I can't be weak, or I can't not be like the perfect woman that I believe I should be, when it really had nothing to do with their relationship at all. They're just believing these shame mantras that they're listening to. And so I think that ties in really well to what Andy was saying of this problem of lust with eights, is they fall into believing the lie that they're not enough. In some way, they need something else to make them complete. Brené Brown also talks about on that show she refers to as academic armor. So I don't know if you've ever watched the TED Talk by Brené Brown. I think it's called The Call to Courage, or it might be called The Power of Vulnerability. But she says when TED Talk called her to do this talk, she was like, yes, absolutely, I'm thrilled. But she had this standard talk that she was used to doing to conventions, to businesses that would hire her. And she said she looked at her husband and said, I'm not going to do my normal speech. There's just a lot of statistics, a lot of data. It's really just this academic armored up speech. And he said, well, why aren't you going to do that? And she's like, well, I can't go and talk to these people about the power of vulnerability when I'm not vulnerable myself. And when all I do is talk about my research and the stats and all these things, like I'm just all the way armored up. There's no vulnerability in that. So I'm really going to try to be vulnerable. And he was like, okay, good luck. And so that's actually the product when you watch her TED Talk with millions and millions of views. That was what she was doing. She was trying something new. She was trying to be vulnerable. And she said after it was filmed, they put it out on YouTube. And her husband told her, don't go look at the comments. Whatever you do, just don't go look at the comments. And she said she waited for him to leave the house for work. And what'd she do? Open up her laptop to look at the comments. And she talks about how she was just lit up by comments online, people saying, well, of course talk about the strength of imperfections. Look at you. Just these horrible, horrible attacks on her. And she said she looked at it and thought, this is why we don't do vulnerability. Look at this. Like, I feel horrible. And she said she got a thing of ice cream and watched Downton Abbey for like a full day to try to just recover from the vulnerability hangover she was feeling from that. But later she was talking to her husband, Steve, and she's like, well, I'm not too worried. This was early when it hadn't reached, even 1 million views yet. She's like, what are people going to do? Google Brene Brown and vulnerability, which is exactly what people do. And she produced this amazing talk that has influenced millions of people and organizations because she stepped into her vulnerability and was brave. So this is a big week for all of our student ministries, really. For youth group, our host homes, we have host homes hosting 10 or less students. They have all the same aspects of youth group: icebreakers, games, lessons, engaging questions. We have student leaders that are going to kind of lead them all through these things. Those launch this week. And then Rooted, actually, which is our college and young adult ministry, it actually started 2 weeks ago, but last week was our first service, standard service, and we have another one this Thursday. So those are just fun things happening in student ministries. But I will tell you, of all the sermons I've preached, including, the ones when I was still a resident intern at churches, probably my least favorite time preaching was last week at Rooted, and let me explain why. And it's because it felt very vulnerable. Okay, we're going to take it back. So when I was in Princeton, still in seminary, still working for churches there, the preaching was often very, very different. And here's why it was different. So in Princeton, there's just obviously a lot of highly academic people. And so at any given church that you're preaching at, you've got professors at Princeton University and Princeton Theological School and all these surrounding higher education schools sitting in the pews. And so there's this newfound pressure of, how do you preach to someone who has their PhD in the New Testament? And so you see that the preaching is very, very highly academic. And I think that can sound almost intimidating, but I can tell you from the preaching side, it actually was a lot easier to preach like that because, like Brene talked about, there's this academic armor you can put on. When writing a sermon, you can be 100% sure about everything you're putting on that paper, everything that you're saying in that sermon. And so just this 100% sureness that you're not wrong and that someone can't say, oh no, you weren't correct about that. There's comfort in that. And so to kind of step back from that and to talk about emotions and to bring in personal stories, it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And so even coming here, there was this new level of vulnerability found in preaching. But beyond that is I've never really preached to college students. We didn't exactly have any sort of training in that. And you could think, well, surely it's not that much different. And there's some truth to that, but the other side of that is, well, actually it is a lot different. Stage of life has a lot to do with how we understand and encounter God and encounter community. And so I was in this totally new zone of a context I was preaching to that I've never preached to before. Just looking at faces that weren't super responsive, and I was like, do they like it? Do they not like it? I don't know. And so it was just this super vulnerable moment of, you just have to show up. You just have to do the thing. You just have to trust that God uses you because of you and despite of you. And it was really, really hard. I stuttered a lot, and I don't even stutter. But it was just this very vulnerable moment for me. Also this week, I had a friend from the past reach out to me, and this is someone I haven't spoken to since college. We had a bit of a falling out. And this person reached out and just shared some very vulnerable things that they were feeling, kind of just wanting to talk about it and talk through it. And it was really unexpected. And my first response was like, oh, thank you for sharing that with me, something like that. But I'm going to be honest with you, for me, that's armoring up. I didn't engage in this equally vulnerable discussion. And so it was actually last night that I was watching this thing by Brene Brown. And obviously she's talking about the call to courage and leaning into vulnerability. And I was thinking about myself and how to work on myself. And I thought, wow, I did not show up for that person. I did not try to be vulnerable. I didn't reach into the parts of me that I don't feel like even like talking or touching and say, you know what, this is how I was feeling in that moment. And this is how I feel now. And so I reached back out to that person and I was like, hey, random, I know we kind of like shut the conversation down, but I wasn't being vulnerable with you. And in case this is the last time we speak, I don't want to leave it that way. Like I really want to dig into myself and try harder. And so I did it. And I will tell you, she talks about vulnerability hangovers. I do still feel one, but I think it's good. Final thing also comes from, I watched it last night, so it's like fresh on my mind, you know. But Brene talks about how there is safety and kind of like being hands off, kind of taking a step back, being a fly on the wall, not being an active contributor in conversations, things like that. There's a safety to it. And she talks about what it means to step into your power. And it's actually a very vulnerable, it's weird because you think, oh, there's like power and vulnerability. They're not really like the same thing, but they absolutely are. So stepping into your power, stepping into the knowledge that you have, stepping into anything you have that can like steer a conversation is a very vulnerable act because people can be like, who is this person? Who do they think they are? Well, I disagree. It's hard because people can push back against you. And so it's a safety mechanism to kind of step back and be like, no, I'm not going to engage with it. And this week in the meditation moments, it talks about Martha a lot. And he ends up saying something like Martha has courage. But I actually think an even better description is saying Martha stepped into her power. Martha had this faith. Martha is this 8, this challenger that will punch through a wall while the rest of us are like, well, what are we supposed to do? There's a wall there. And she's just a very powerful biblical figure because of it. And so Brene just encourages us to step into our power in moments that we have something to contribute. And especially this being something that women need to work on because women aren't necessarily encouraged to be the most powerful people in the room. But if God empowered you to be so, it's your job to step into that and to take it, even if it means that you'll be criticized and people won't like you or people will say things about you. Over and over again, she uses this she says Teddy Roosevelt. I thought it was Teddy Roosevelt, but I kind of trust Brene. So I'm going to say Theodore Roosevelt. But nonetheless, here's the quote she uses a lot, and I actually want to leave us with it today because I think it's absolutely connected to this concept of what an Enneagram 8 is. The quote has been named the man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end that triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I want to leave you with that quote. Don't be afraid to step into your power. And part of stepping into your power is engaging in vulnerability and touching the things that feel really hard to touch. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the power of community and for leaders who help us point and look at things within ourselves that we would rather not. We ask that you empower us to be vulnerable with ourselves, with our loved ones, with our friends and our community, to have the hard conversations and to dare greatly. We know that if as a church, if as an organization, if as moms and dads, we dare greatly and have hard conversations, we will be a more healed, a more happy, a more complete version of what you call us to be into the world. We love you, and we are grateful for all that you are. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks so much for joining me today.